All right, all right. We have a lot of information, so we are slowing down in the entrance, but let's get going. All right, navigating core web vitals with Gatsby and Yoast is what we are on today. A little housekeeping before we get started. This webinar will be recorded. We'll send an email out in the next 48 hours with that recording. So don't worry, anything that's said today, all these awesome insights, you'll be able to get a copy of if you're not able to be here the whole time with us. I know it's tough around the globe with hours. And then please ask any questions you have in the questions tab. We'll try and get back to that either during the presentation or after. You'll see how we're kind of split up today. And then also, if you have any audio issues, please feel free to also point that out in the questions, and we'll try to get that sorted out. For now, if everyone can just give a quick hand raise or just, I guess, let me know if you can hear me. I think we should be good. All right, it's awesome to see some come through. All right, so what we're covering today, we are covering core web vitals, how to measure them, and then how to optimize. And today we have Gatsby and Yoast. Gatsby is kind of the performance side of things, and Yoast is the SEO side of things. And this is where Google Core Web Vitals are kind of combining here, where both sides of the equation are coming together, and they're really impacting what we're getting from organic results from Google. So just quick intro to Gatsby. Gatsby is a front-end open source framework. It was born in 2015. Sam's actually one of our co-founders. He's on the presentation today. We have over getting close to 50 million downloads of the framework itself. And actually this week we just crossed the 50,000 GitHub star threshold. So still continuing to grow in popularity and trying to solve a lot of the performance, scalability, and security issues that the web has thrown at us. We're trying to solve that through our framework. And then Yoast, Jono, you can give a quick intro. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I should unmute myself before I try and do that. So yeah, I'm Jono. I'm what we loosely refer to as special ops at Yoast, which means I do a bunch of our product R&D and get down in the nitty-gritty of our technical SEO, making sure that we're on top of things like the Core Web Vitals update. We know exactly where we're going and how all the nuts and bolts move. Why is that interesting? I think, as Dan mentioned, this really is the intersect between performance and SEO in a way that hasn't really happened before. So for me, it's really exciting as a technical SEO and performance geek. Why is Yoast relevant to this conversation? Increasingly, we see a move and a trend towards the web becoming more headless, which is great, which is especially great if you're in the Gatsby space, obviously. And the WordPress space in particular, we see some of the very, very few approaches and sites which really manage to sort out going headless in an SEO-friendly way. Gatsby is one of the very few platforms that gets that right. However, oh gosh, it's freaking complicated. So there are so many edge cases and nuances and awkwardnesses around things like how individual bits of your SEO should work in edge cases. Like if I have a custom canonical URL on my page, how should my Open Graph URL behave? And a thousand more scenarios like that. As end developers and site managers, it's not realistic for people to manage that and get it right and maintain it. So one of the things that we're putting a lot of work into is taking all of that sort of thing that Yoast SEO does automatically behind the scenes and exposing it in APIs that people like Gatsby developers can just request and get the right stuff back for, which is pretty awesome. This is one of the things I've spent a lot of time involved in. You can see some of our documentation here. Do go take a look. If you're doing Gatsby stuff and want to get your SEO right, this is by far and away the most effective way of doing it. Don't try and reinvent the wheel. Don't try and manage your own logic for which meta tag should be output in which scenarios. We handle all of that. This is great. There's a whole bunch of other stuff in there. But yeah, this is very much the way we see the future of headless WordPress working. It's pretty cool stuff. So yeah, thanks.
All right, awesome. So we have a quick poll for the crowd today, just to get everyone on the same page. What is your level of urgency in preparing for the Core Vitals update? That is our question today. We'll give about, I don't know, 1 minute for everyone to get through there. All right, have some answers rolling in. High is winning. All right, now, all right. So if we looked at it in the high medium bracket, we're definitely around 80%. So obviously everyone is taking it seriously. Google has given us some time to think about it. They announced it in 2020. I think COVID was slowed down some of their rollout, but they did just recently announce that it will start in May 2021 as their beginning point in the rollout process. All right, it looks like great answering. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it. 75% voted. We're looking at 39% high, 43% medium, and then only 18% are low. So seems like most of the people are at least worried about it a little bit. All right, so core Web Vitals. Let's first talk about what are Web Vitals in general. What did Google do when they came out with this measurement? And then we'll talk about the core themselves. I think that the Web Vitals were the first part that Google launched that has an actual measurable interface. So no longer is it a black box of performance and organic growth. Web Vitals were that first part of the search signal that Google was trying to quantify. It is part of the user experience of the website. So it's the website experience rather than like a content experience or a brand experience. So this is a small subset of the total ranking factors that Google's algorithm is made up of. Web Vitals are a small but important part of that. And then core Web Vitals are even a smaller. So Jono, you want to kind of take us through what the core Web Vitals are in this case?
Yeah, sure. Cool. So yeah, and I think it's worth just dwelling on a point you made, which is this is very much a page-centric thing. And what they're really measuring is page by page by page. So it's worth it. It doesn't matter if your home page is fast and great and the rest of your pages are a bit rubbish. That's going to hurt you. So we really need to be looking at this URL by URL essentially. So we have 3 metrics, and we should start by pointing out that this is a moving target. So these metrics are not set in stone. There may be more metrics. They may deprecate some. The engines behind these are open source and changing. The thresholds might mature, but for now, this feels like a pretty solid base to be building on. So we have these 3 metrics, which we'll go through in more detail. We have largest contentful paint, first input delay, and cumulative layout shift. And for each of those metrics, you might expect to get a score in a range from either good, needs improving, or poor. So this is far and away the most important one. Well, potentially depending on your situation. Largest contentful paint does what it says on the box. This is how many milliseconds does it take to load the biggest thing on the page. And depending on your page, what that thing is might vary. Typically, you might expect it to be a big hero image in a banner, but it might also be a particularly large piece of header text, for example, or maybe even a cookie notice, depending on how your page looks. And what Google perceives the largest contentful paint and the element that's being painted to be will change as that page loads. So you need to take a step back and really look at what is the biggest, most important thing on this page, and how do I speed that up as much as possible?
Definitely, and the scale on the right here is pretty consistent as far as green, yellow, red. Green is good, yellow is going to be in the needs improving bucket, and red is poor. You'll see that there's kind of a scoring mechanism for all of the 3 core Web Vitals, and it'll be similar.
We should also mention that, so one of the things that Google has announced is that there will be a minor ranking boost if you get a good score on all of these, which obviously everyone is very excited about, and it's one of the reasons that everybody is jumping onto this. That does mean you have to score in the green category on all 3 of these and maintain that score for a reasonable amount of time. So it's no good to smash one of these out of the ballpark and be awful on the rest. You really need to be green across the board.
All right, this is a quick example of a large contentful paint. Obviously, the top is blurred image of the bottom, but these are 2 examples of really large images that are going to affect your LCP drastically. We'll kind of have examples of each. At the end, we will go through an optimization, and Sam has awesome kind of information about what we can do for each one and how to get better about it. So the next one is FID, first input delay. You want to walk us through this one, Jono?
Yeah, sadly we don't have an image for this because it's quite hard to visualize, but the principle is, we've all experienced this. You go to a URL on your phone, the page looks like it's starting to load, and you try and drag to move the page, or you try and press on a button, and either nothing happens, which is really annoying because you don't know whether it's working or not, or the page kind of jutters and janks and stutters because in the background it's still downloading and passing a whole bunch of JavaScript, or something's blocking the viewport. Essentially, what we want to be able to do is allow the user to interact with the page as quickly as possible. When they start to try and do a thing, that shouldn't be impacted by slow animations and things of the page, things that aren't quite ready on the page. And therefore, a lot of the optimization for techniques for addressing this really mean only loading the bare minimum stuff required to initially display that page and to allow users to interact with what's displayed, which might not be how you conventionally load your page. You might ship a big bundle, or you might not differentiate, say, between what's above the fold and what's below. So it really requires that you think architecturally around what is the smallest package I can send to allow the user to interact with this thing immediately.
For sure, we see a lot of third-party scripts and tags here too. Also really delay that and make the browser wait for that last piece of information to load before you're actually able to interact with the website as well.
Yeah,
and this one, first input delay is interesting around the measurement, which we'll go through in our next section. But there's actually another measurement that Google talks about, total blocking time, that really helps us kind of dig in to this score and how we can fix it in the Chrome Dev Tools window.
nice.
Last one of the core web vitals, cumulative layout shift. This one I think is actually the most annoying out of all of them, right?
Yeah, yeah, and this is really, I find this really interesting for two reasons. One is, so if we skip forward a slide, we can visualize what this looks like. One is, this isn't really, I think, strictly a performance issue. This is a user experience issue. This is as, all performances, but you know what I mean. As the page loads, I go to interact with something, and something disrupts that flow. An image or a button or an advert loads into the page, and it changes the layout. And as a result, I might click something I don't intend to click on, or it slows the page down as all the text has to reflow and change. We've all seen this 1,000 times on the web. You start to read the paragraph and an image pops in unexpectedly and the paragraph moves across the page. That's really computationally expensive. It's really disruptive. It's a really unpleasant experience. So this is one of the things that Google really wants to crack down on. Now, frustratingly, it's also often one of the hardest things to fix because you really need to have built your site in a way that where the site itself understands how and where everything is going to be loaded and displayed, that nothing is unexpected, that all of your images have dimensions, that your fonts are loaded efficiently, and 1,000 other things. This is really hard to get down from like into the red into the green because it's so many small things. But it's yeah, one of the most interesting areas, I think.
The image dimension point you threw out for me was definitely one of the, like, I don't know, light bulb moments. I was checking Twitter and someone had mentioned that it's a great way to defend against this for ad movements. So when you throw an ad block, actually have your CSS and HTML be aware of that ad block before it's loaded. So have your dimensions already spaced out for that. So there's already a big blank square in the middle of the screen, but it doesn't mess with your ability to interact with the screen or with the content once it's loaded. Again, yeah, it's also really interesting because, yep, sorry, John, you can go.
No, sorry, carry on.
I was just going to say it's also really interesting that Google's making this such a big point because let's be honest, most of it is advertising, or at least a lot of it is advertising, and a lot of it is Google advertising. So it's something that's directly to their heart, and I know that they have both sides of it, so it'll be interesting to see what happens here.
Yeah, one it just.
And something that I'll be chatting about later is how Gatsby helps do some of this for you actually out of the box as well.
I can't wait for the performance ones after this. All right, so the tools you need to measure it. Google gives us a few official tools to kind of measure these official metrics. John and I talked about this, about all the tools we could go through. There have been a plethora of tools over the past 20 years in SEO of trying to capture a lot of this, right? GTmetrix, web page speed tests. There's just a plethora of kind of third-party tools that have tried to really correlate performance speed and organic performance. So we wanted to kind of not go that route and focus really on the new breed of tools that Google is officially sanctioning and officially rolling out with a lot of their core web vitals. So here's a list right here that they put out: Page Insights feeds, Chrome UX report, Search Console, Chrome DevTools, Lighthouse, and then the Web Vitals extension inside Chrome. But these are kind of their core tooling sets for capturing these. You'll see a lot of them do some of the similar things. They do it in a different way, maybe they're accessed in a different way, but they all kind of have their own like little unique spot. So I'll just flip through these. Jono, we can quickly talk about how we can best measure them. I know some of them are more important than others. And we'll start, I think, actually, first, let's talk about lab data and field data between these tools. So quickly,
Yeah, that makes sense.
these tools capture either data in a lab setting, so synthetically measuring the performance at that one particular time. So let's say you have a web page, you run it through a tool that uses lab data. They're going to tell you that snapshot with that performance and that computation power, exactly what that number is. So it's kind of, again, synthetic is a great way to say it. It's not really taking into a lot of the real world variability with people's networks, with international networks. It's kind of just looking at it in a small scope. Field data is really that more expansive real user measurement where we're actually combining opted-in data from the Chrome browser, from Android devices, and giving us a holistic view of our actual Chrome Vital score. So these two things, you'll see that some tools do things with lab data, some do things with field data, some are a combo. But it is kind of important to remember here when we are running, for instance, like Lighthouse. A lot of these are measured in the field metrics or lab metrics.
Slightly around my side. I was just going to say it's important to note that Google will judge you on the field data, not on the lab data. So the lab data is really handy to do a kind of point-in-time test to diagnose and spot issues and opportunities. But if you want to understand how Google's going to be perceiving you, that's very much the field data. And that's gathered from a whole bunch of Chrome users. I forget which setting it is, but anybody who's opted into some flavor of the Chrome history settings, which is a lot of Chrome users, aggregates your data URL by URL by URL in the real world. And as Dan hinted at, that's users who may be accessing your site on an old mobile phone, on a 3G connection from another continent. And if you're scoring poorly from them, you're going to impact your chance of unlocking those ranking benefits. So there really is a pivot here that you can't think about how fast is this for me on my fast desktop site. You've got to really think about how fast can this be for a user with intermittent networking issues on an ancient Nokia phone in a region with underdeveloped infrastructure. Those are the users we really need to be catering for. So this is a hard ask, but that's the direction.
Exactly, and that Lighthouse is actually a good example of that. There's a question right now just asked about Lighthouse. Lighthouse, and if it improves your score by running it without Chrome plugins on a faster machine. And those things, they are, unfortunately, with the lab data, they are true. Lighthouse score will kind of vary based on your own machine, based on your own third-party plugins that are running in the Chrome browser. And that's where actually something like Gatsby Cloud that Sam will go through actually at the end, where like we have a consistent Lighthouse score that's happening on our preview environments and our real environments. Those are very consistent because they're kind of a point in time with the same machine. Whereas when you run Lighthouse kind of on your own, you need to remember that there needs to be some consistency around what other windows you have open, what plugins are running at that point in time. Lighthouse is also really cool because it can be run via the browser in DevTools or via CLI or an API. So it can be part of your build process using it in a CI/CD tooling system.
Yeah, this is really nice. And as it says, it's also worth noting that Lighthouse itself is an open source tooling system. So it's continually being developed. There are other people chipping away at it. I think the other week they launched a change which made quite a significant impact on how they measured cumulative layout shift, which changed everybody's scores, and everybody was very upset. But again, it's worth understanding that all of these are moving targets and that they're going to continually improve. So yeah, you want to get really close to understanding how Google sees your site, strip away all of the tools and look at the raw Lighthouse data.
All right, next one is page speed insights, which might be, although Lighthouse is up there, this one might be the most popular for marketing and maybe not developer crowd.
Yeah, this is super easy to access, to digest, to consume. You can get to it through a web interface. It comes shipped in the Chrome developer tools. It gives you a nice number, some pretty charts. It gives you some recommendations as well. Again, it's all built on Lighthouse. It's just not quite as in-depth, but it's really handy for kind of the making the business case arguments and putting screenshots and things like this.
Exactly. Screenshots are always good. The Chrome UX report. This one is actually got a pretty good update with Core Web Vitals. But you want to go through this one?
Yeah, this is really cool. So one of the things that it's worth noting is that because Google are collecting all of this data in aggregate from all of these sites and all of these users, you can access that and you can query this. In fact, this screenshot is from Google Data Studio showing Core Web Vitals data for the last period, queryable by month and device, but you can change the origin you want to look at. You can monitor your competitors' sites, your own sites, other sites, and you can get a feel for how well are they doing. And again, you get this really nice breakdown of good, medium, bad spread across their users. You can just about see in the example here that Google.com, 16% of the time thereabouts, provides bad cumulative layout shift. Maybe there are a subset of types of users or devices or browsers that they've missed in their optimization. This stuff is really, really good for monitoring trend over time and spotting issues. Oh yeah, and you can pull it all out by a BigQuery as well, which is pretty awesome. So you can pipe it into your own ecosystem.
Definitely. I was messing around last week with BigQuery. It's pretty fantastic that they gave us that option. You don't have to do it all yourself via an API. It is actually rather to do in the BigQuery interface, which is nice.
Yeah.
Search Console. This, I think, on the aggregate is the best one to just get a healthy view of your actual website. It's doing it kind of Chrome Web Vitals or Core Web Vitals across all of your web pages, not looking at a page by page basis, but giving you a breakdown of the pages.
Yeah, and it does some quite intelligent grouping, not just by URL patterns, but it tries to do a little bit of machine learning and says things like, okay, here are 1,000 of your product pages and here are 300 of your blog posts, and tries to find similar issues across similar page types, which obviously if you're debugging this sort of stuff, more often than not, you want to be doing it template level rather than page level.
Definitely, and this is a better view of like the 10,000 feet view, which to your point is usually in the templates rather than the particular page itself and looking at it under a microscope. But it's a great spot to start to group together things, make plans about which pages you're going to tackle, which templates you're going to tackle. But it's an awesome strategizing kind of doc and viewpoint. Yeah. All right, the last two are all about Chrome DevTools and the particular, like here, and the total blocking time where we can really kind of dive into the nitty gritty of the website itself.
Yeah, I think Sam's going to get onto it in a minute, but we don't want to talk through all of the micro bits around which bits to optimize and how. But if you do want to get into that, the best tool for starting and wading into it is definitely just to open up Chrome DevTools and looking at the network tab. You can see an example here of all the things that load on my site, and I might very well start asking myself whether AMP is really the best system for me to be on, given that it's loading stuff from third-party domains and there's some blocking behavior there. You can start to see where those issues and opportunities are. It's really powerful. Yeah, and then you can dive in super deep and get right down into the rendering and frame behavior and the memory optimization, and right down into how do the deep technical gubbins of this page interact with my CPU and my graphics card and that sort of stuff, which you can really find some interesting issues in, especially if you're relying on a lot of JavaScript, which then in turn relies on other JavaScript.
Sounds perfect. All right, and actually, we have a few questions real quick on the rollout, which is super apropos right now. So the rollout is happening at the end of May, early June, and it will be scaled. So starting like, let's say early June, when the first bit rolls out, Google has said it's not going to absolutely shake the internet on day one. You'll see this kind of slowly increase in importance over the coming months and into summer and fall. hopefully by the end of 21, we will have like kind of a seismic shift where we have seen the results of this. But in general, it is going to be a slow scaled rollout of these core web vitals. All right, the future of core web vitals quick. What's next, right? Like these are the first three. I know Web Vitals came out really like 2 years ago, I think, in a blog post. Core Web Vitals started last year in a blog post. What do you think is next on deck for Google and this user experience measurement?
Well, I know anecdotally from some of the people behind the scenes that there are definitely more metrics coming, and the thresholds for good will get harder. The initial green scores are going to get harder and harder to hit because the web will get faster, user expectations will increase, the average will need to rise continually. So that's a big deal. When you start digging around in some of the technical documentations, you see the word smoothness come up in a lot of, there's a Chrome API that's a work in progress at the moment. I think smoothness is a really interesting concept because they want to measure beyond just the initial load. And if you've got things like animations and transitions, you need to be maintaining a nice frame rate and making those interactions not janky. So that could well be the next metric. And then it wouldn't surprise me if they go beyond speed into other areas like accessibility and usability best practice, and maybe some areas of best practice SEO, but we'll see. But yeah, there's more coming. This is very much the starting point. So definitely need to be getting on with this immediately.
Those last two, definitely I could see happening quick. Accessibility is obviously becoming more and more at the forefront of how we're building the web, which is fantastic to see. And then I think the smoothness too is something that like, with Gatsby for sure, it's always there. I don't know how to quantify what like is smooth clicking a button and seeing it instantly, but there's something there that I'm sure Google can figure out how to measure. And then the tougher score threshold is interesting too, because I know there's been a lot of studies from a lot of the big SEO players like Searchmetrics, SEMrush, about how many of the like internet's pages are actually scoring in the good in some of these thresholds, and it is not high. A lot of these numbers are pretty low.
50%. Yeah.
Exactly. All right. So now, with kind of the educational portion away at the front, we're going to turn things over to Sam Bagua, and we're going to talk about kind of how these things affect real life performance and what we can do to help out there. So Sam, I will turn over the presentation to you, and then we'll start from there.
Yeah, I'm going to figure out how the controls work here. Okay.
You have the power now.
I have the power. Great. Well, it's great to chat with everyone today. I'm going to be talking about okay, so it looks like this is going to be tricky. It looks like I would have to quit. Looks like I would have to quit GoToMeeting and reopen it to set this up properly.
Right, I'm sharing.
Okay, great. So get ready to flip through stuff quickly, Dan.
All right, you want to make me presenter again?
Let's see how change. Here we go. We're gonna hand it back over to
on the fly. All right, here we go.
Okay. Do you have it, Dan? Or
I have it.
Okay, great. So I'm basically so I'm basically going to walk through sort of, I'm going to kind of walk through how you gain an intuition about this stuff, because the hardest part, so there's the tools, which you guys have kind of just discussed and talked about, but there's also gaining an intuition as a developer, right? We want to not just understand the metrics, but like intuitively feel the quality of our code in particular aspects. We've all sort of like looked at a class or looked at a function, been like, there's something wrong here, there's something weird, it's buggy, and so can we go to the next slide?
Yep.
What you're not going to take away here is details about what every single performance bottleneck is or how to fix all of them. What we are going to take away, next, is when you watch a page load on your website, just having an intuitive feel for how much it's been optimized, how good the core web vitals look, and how to make it better. Next. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to go through both an optimized and an unoptimized page load. We're going to see sort of like where the core web vitals happen in each experience. And then we're going to discuss sort of the 7 optimizations you can do to get your performance work to basically 90% done. So let's start with this unoptimized page load. So when the page starts loading, you'll see that, right, it's starting to stream HTML. So let's go, then at 1 second, the HTML, in 1.5 seconds here, the HTML comes in. But the way that this page is structured, it's not structured to allow to start loading. So it starts streaming the other elements of the page, and then the content starts coming in, and then it starts actually bouncing around to load. Finally, we hit interactivity at 5.5 seconds. And you kind of, so, okay, there's a lot that happened there. Don't worry, we're gonna go through this again as we kind of go through the presentation. So let's go to the next one. So optimized, now let's look at the same page load, but this page load is going to be optimized. So we start streaming the HTML. It comes in here at 1 second. And then, sorry, Dan, can you go back and hold that 1 second for a bit, please?
Yeah, sure.
So it holds that. So right now we've got the shell of the website loaded, and we've got the shell of the website loaded, and we've inlined the CSS, and you see that placeholder image there holding the space for where the image is going to come in at 2 seconds, and where the image is going to come in at 2 seconds, and then we have, then at 2.5 seconds we hit interactivity. Great. So we'll notice that like we needed to do less in this example to get to sort of the page being visually complete and then interactivity than we did in the unoptimized website. But we'll go through this a little bit more. Again, we'll run through this example multiple times. And let's just kind of talk a little bit about, okay, where do the core web vitals happen in the context of each page load experience? So now we're gonna walk through those. Okay, so largest contentful paint. Let's go to the next slide. So we will see here in the unoptimized website. In the unoptimized website, we've got this going on at 2 seconds, where all the text and the images are basically in. And then on the unoptimized website, this happens at 4.5 seconds. So at this point, basically everything from HTML, third-party scripts, CSS, JavaScript, the fonts have all sort of like needed to load at this point for the unoptimized website to hit largest contentful paint, and that's one reason that it's been delayed to 4.5 seconds. Yeah, so then let's talk about cumulative layout shift in the context of these 2 page loads. So for the optimized website, next slide. For the optimized website, we have this because we've loaded a page shell. In this instance, we don't see a large shift because the page has been server-side rendered with the CSS inline, and so it sort of holds the place of the images and the text as things are coming in. Whereas the unoptimized website, we'll see there's a little bit of jankiness here as the page loads. If you just hit the next couple slides, where the image comes in. And yes, as Jenna and Dan were saying earlier, we've all seen this 1,000 times as we're loading websites. Less now than used to, but we've all seen this a lot, right? So first input delay, again, I think as Jenna and Dan mentioned earlier, like this often happens between the largest contentful paint and when the site is kind of interactive. And so, the useful way to think about kind of like reducing it is just reducing the time between, we'll get to that a little bit later, but reducing the time between largest contentful paint and interactivity. So you see here at 2 seconds, we've got that largest contentful paint happening where the content is sort of present on the screen. Then we, go to 2.5 seconds and we see the interactivity, which is kind of what we're indicating with the mouse, the mouse over on this page. And now we can click things, and it's for the unoptimized website. We have 4.5 seconds. All the content is there, but it takes until we get to 5.5 seconds to hit interactivity, right? So, whatever the first input delay is going to be is typically just a fraction, right, of that in between time. So if it takes a half second to get from LCP to interactivity, then that's less opportunity for a high first input delay versus, more opportunity for there to be a high input first input delay if we have, larger gaps between largest contentful paint and full interactivity. And that's again related to the size of the JavaScript bundles that you're parsing. We're going to get into sort of exactly all these different points later. But now that we've kind of seen the unoptimized page load by itself, the optimized page load by itself, we've walked through the metrics for each one and where they occur in context of those page load experiences. Let's look at them kind of side by side, and we'll start to get a little bit more into exactly what those things are that are making the optimized website perform better than the unoptimized website. So we can see, the optimized website through the first second. We've already got here for the optimized website, the HTML has come in where the unoptimized website HTML is still loading, right? And there's a number of reasons why that could be, but the easiest way to optimize it is if you're not already doing this using a CDN to get closer to your users. Then when we get to 1.5 seconds, we start seeing, like, again, the lack of the layout shift. The page is staying like visually kind of consistent as the page is progressively loading. We hit 2 seconds. We have this SVG sort of placeholder inline that then gets replaced. And for those who have used and built Gatsby sites, obviously this is something you're very familiar with. And this is like a best practice UI and something that helps here because it makes the transition smooth and seamless, right? And it's also again like helpful for this cumulative layout shift score and metric. So then again, low first input delay as we move from 2 to 2.5 seconds. The unoptimized website again is still waiting to load sort of the page in the beginning, and that's if you look at why, one of the reasons why is it's also doing a lot more work. It's trying to it needs a lot more work to happen before it can start painting. The way that it's structured is requiring sort of is the CSS, JavaScript, and the fonts in order to start painting. And let's keep going until 3.5 seconds. And that's where we start seeing the unoptimized website loads, and we start seeing some jankiness over here in the loading experience. That again, that's a large cumulative layout shift. So then we're going to keep going, and then we get to 5 seconds, and then 5.5 seconds, and again some opportunity for an input delay here. So again, like we're going through the same example kind of like a number of times, because often as developers, the way that we develop intuition is sort of we look at we look at the same example enough so that we understand exactly what's going on at each stage. And again, like what I'm sort of hoping you take away from this part of the webinar is like, when you're seeing a page load, you just like, aha, I can kind of intuitively feel when each of these events are happening, and simulated in DevTools under different device connections, and get that intuitive feel on a 3G network or like a Moto G4 phone or whatever conditions you want to kind of throw at the simulator. So let's keep going on.
Sam, I thought it was pretty cool how you can see easily in these two examples that the 3 core web vitals build upon each other.
Exactly.
And to optimize the entire experience, all 3 of them really need to work together well. Otherwise, like if you just fix your FID, like you're still going to be lagging from your largest contentful paint that the browser's waiting for.
Exactly. Both the web vitals play really well together, and then also as we'll see as we kind of go into the optimization part, the optimizations that you can do often affect multiple metrics at multiple of these at the same time. So let's move now, and what we're going to do next is so now, like, you know, we got a little bit of a preview of this because I was kind of talking about what was making that optimized website load faster than the unoptimized website. But really, it kind of comes down to sort of these 7 steps that get us to generally 90% done in terms of performance optimization. Now, there are always going to be, like, you know, things that are kind of specific to your site, and sometimes those things are kind of big enough that, like, you need to do sort of extra things. But, like, you generally, and you know, generally these are seven steps that if you do them, you should be able to get most of the way there, or almost all of the way there, ideally, right? And so you know, this is again like what we've seen kind of, you know, from our experience of helping Gatsby users with performance audits, connecting a lot ourselves as an organization. So this is kind of hard won practical experience from the Gatsby team. So let's kind of go to the next slide here, and we're going to watch again. We're going to go through that same comparative page loading experience, but this time with the different optimizations kind of being highlighted, right? So, you know, again, as the page starts loading, the optimized website starts by using a CDN, which means that when we get to 1 second, the optimized website has streamed in the HTML while the unoptimized website is still waiting for the HTML, and then again we're rendering the sorry, Dan, can you go back?
Yeah,
we're rendering the page shell here. We're inlining the critical CSS, so in 1.5 seconds. You know, we're progressively loading the images, and then 2 seconds. You know, this sort of like requests don't block page load. You know, there's things that like, depending on the way that your requests are structured in your HTML, where they are sort of in your head, you know, if you're requesting font files, there's a lot of things that you can do on accident that what the browser, when you do them in the HTML, like the browser essentially says, oh, well, I can't paint this thing until I'm waiting for all of these things to come in, and that delays it significantly. And that's again why why the unoptimized website is still waiting to load, while the optimized website, you know, has about as much information, not really that much more information, but is kind of able to sort of like paint and then start kind of adjusting, tweaking a little bit as, you know, for example, the fonts come in, right? Then because there's bundle size minimization, right, we have less JavaScript, and that's why the optimized website only takes a half a second to get from largest contentful paint to interactivity. And we can kind of roll through the rest of these, you know, no progressively loaded image in this loading experience. And then, you know, again, because we have an unoptimized bundle size, it takes, you know, a second. You know, and that's actually not super bad, but, you know, you can to get from largest contentful paint to fully interactive. So great. So again, there are these, you know, 7 kind of different kind of key pieces of performance optimization that will get you from 90% of the way there in terms of being able to hit green in those metrics in each of the core web vital metrics. So let's go to the next slide. And so you can kind of see like each one of these sort of metrics affects the web vitals differently. There's the JavaScript related ones. So first off, everything, you know, and this is something Dan mentioned earlier, right? Everything basically affects largest contentful paint, right? Because everything is every performance optimization you do, every one of these kind of key 7 ones will help your page load faster and get to near visual completeness faster. The JavaScript related ones like delaying third-party scripts and minimizing JavaScript bundle size, those are going to kind of help with the those are going to help a little bit with the first input delay by just minimizing the amount that your browser is parsing the JavaScript, because when it's parsing the JavaScript, it can't be responding to user input. It's called blocking the main thread. Then with cumulative layout shift, the things that help that are the things that like make your page kind of visually stable, right? So that's server-side rendering the shell, having kind of the styles in line, especially sort of the critical kind of above the fold styles, and then progressively loading images. So then like, you know, this is something we think about a ton at Gatsby. I'll kind of transition from sort of like, you know, hey, these are the things you need to do, to, you know, those who are using Gatsby, those who, you know, are considering Gatsby. How does Gatsby kind of help with some of these things? So, you know, there's some of these it kind of, you know, provides out of the box. Using a CDN is some of these it makes easier. So using a CDN is much easier with Gatsby. Gatsby is just Gatsby gives you a site that is a bunch of files that you can easily host on any CDN. It server renders a shell for you sort of out of the box, you know, using a variety of plugins to CSS libraries, inline styles. The requests don't block, like it makes the request blocking page load easier by reducing chaining problems with fonts. It delays you can delay third-party scripts fairly easily by using the onInitial client render hook in Gatsby SSR. You can minimize the JavaScript bundle size by using Gatsby plugin perf budgets, which looks like I slightly misspelled there, to easily audit. Then Gatsby sort of lets you progressively load images out of the box using Gatsby plugin image. I know that was a lot of information. I gave a separate talk on this on GatsbyConf about a month ago called The Anatomy of a Performance Audit. So, you know, I'd encourage you to sort of like, you know, dive deeper if you haven't seen that talk and you want to dive deeper into some of these aspects, specifically in the Gatsby context. You can just Google, you know, my name with The Anatomy of a Performance Audit, and you'll be able to sort of dive deeper there. And then finally, let's go to the next slide. Okay. Oops. I think I might have just edited
another slide, but
at the end, but like, you know, kind of key takeaways, right? Key takeaways. You know, get familiar with the modern tools. Get familiar with the core web vitals. Then like develop an intuition, right? And you know, just ideally, you know, watch page load experiences, simulate it until you feel like you really understand it, you know, and then once you understand the optimizations as well, you know, performance is just another kind of, and performance engineering is just another kind of engineering, in the same way that we all develop intuitions around, you know, debugging a particular system or any other, you know, building something quickly, or why are my tests being flaky, you know, these kinds of things. You develop an intuition around performance, right? Just as you kind of like work on it with the knowledge of the sort of the core principles that underlie the whole thing. Yeah, let's super excited to kind of share this with you, and then I think we can all jump into the questions.
Yeah, so we have quite a few questions. I am guessing we will not be able to get all of them, but we'll definitely take them all down. We were talking about before, we'll try and answer them either via email or on Twitter. We can get to them, but we can start. There's actually a good one that just came in. I use Gatsby, but I'm not aware of the inline styles used out of the box. Where does this occur? Sam, you want to take that one on the framework itself?
Yeah, I think so. So the way to kind of see how Gatsby inlines the styles and presents the HTML is just click View Source on a Gatsby site. So you can click that on, excuse me, on your homepage on the Gatsby on the Gatsby homepage, and you'll see like the CSS kind of being inlined in that HTML in the initial HTML file. So Gatsby kind of compiles that and does that automatically. If you're using a styling library like Emotion or Style Components, and then you use the relevant Gatsby plugin for it, so like Gatsby plugin Style Components, Gatsby plugin Emotions, it will take the styles that are generated by Emotion or Style Components and actually render them inline. Which not to get too deep into the weeds here, but you do it because it will make your page. Use the plugin because it will make your page load faster.
All right, that makes sense. Like that answer. I will go back to a general one. If I put and some of these have been answered, but I kind of want to throw them out because they're good questions. They encompass a lot of other questions that people ask. But if I put a skeleton loader for an image and load an image after 5 seconds on the page, how is that going to affect LCP and FID? John, you want to take that one? Is that like good practice, throwing it 5 seconds later, as long as there's a skeleton?
It's an interesting one. So the 5 second number specifically is interesting because Google recently changed how they're measuring cumulative layout shift to account for pages that change over time. I guess the answer is right now the scores you get you might get away with trying to trick them because they're not that sophisticated yet. But ultimately, where they want to go is to understand that whole loading experience. And I don't think there's a good user experience argument for deferring an image in that way rather than just loading it more quickly and efficiently. So in some cases, placeholders might be a good idea, but generally speaking, fix the performance bottlenecks that mean you need a placeholder and just ship the thing immediately.
Yeah, and a similar one is like CLS is only considered during the page load time, right? Like where does that time stop that now Google is actually measuring some of these things? Is it when the DOM is fully ready, or is it always? Will we see that kind of evolve?
We're definitely seeing it evolve. I shared a link that if I'd taken the time to prep a bit better earlier, would have gone and looked at the exact numbers placing. But they're definitely looking beyond the initial DOM. Like they at the moment, these metrics are very focused on the initial load. They really want them to measure the whole experience. Pages, especially in the world of JavaScript frameworks and single page apps, change and morph and flow beyond the initial interaction, and those experiences are just as important as the initial load time. So expect to need to optimize the whole experience, not just shipping stuff quickly.
All right. Do either of you have any suggestions on how to deal with unused JavaScript or unused CSS that is still getting loaded on the site and getting counted inside Google scoring?
I guess the flippant easy answer is don't load stuff you don't need, but that's an incredibly hard architectural challenge. I do think increasingly modern transport protocols like HTTP2 and HTTP3 /QUIC, which you get out the box with Cloudflare, for example, mean it's much easier and more performant to ship lots of small resources. So a decade ago, you might have said, send all of your stuff in one file, because that's most efficient, then they've got it, and if they don't use it, fine. Now you really want to be saying, actually, calculate which 38 specific files they're going to need based on the template, the content, the context, and only send them that. But you've really got to dig down into the weeds to get that level of optimization. And really, you'll never get to 100% utilization because that's not the way that websites work when they're moving and changing and evolving. But certainly don't load stuff you don't need.
All right. Video backgrounds. I know this is a big one. People like to use video backgrounds on the hero. Is there anything architecturally that we can do to make that experience either better performance-wise or just delay it a little bit? What is kind of the best practice there, do you think?
There's some really clever stuff you can do. Obviously, you can compress the heck out of them. And if it's a big background, chances are it doesn't need to be incredible quality, and you could add some blurring over the top of it via CSS, so that could be resource intensive. What you can do, there's a clever technique where you can load an MP4 video in an image file. I don't know how well supported that is yet, but there are polyfills. And similarly, you can load MP4s instead of MP4s instead of GIFs. There's all sorts of clever cutting edge techniques you can use around that. It's worth doing a bit of research. You just search MP4s in images. that makes things a lot faster.
All right. And then AMP, a couple questions about AMP. Do you see AMP continuing to be important? And then Sam, is there any like combination of Gatsby AMP plugin? Is there anything that we do out of the box with it? Or is it largely kind of a version 1 evolving of some of these web vitals?
I mean, I can take the Gatsby side.
Sure.
You know, less qualified to speak to AMP kind of generally, but there's a couple of community plugins that add in AMP support. I think in post processing of Gatsby. If you're using Gatsby, I'd recommend sort of like looking into those plugins. We've seen a number of Gatsby sites using AMP.
Nice. I should, before I wax lyrical about AMP, I should disclose that I'm a member of the AMP advisory committee, so I'm behind the scenes there. But that's because I believe in the standard. I think it's not the right fit for every website and every person, but if you find yourself thinking maybe AMP's for me, definitely go take a look. It can be an extremely powerful, easy way to build something which is inherently performant. It's not going away, it's not going anywhere. There are obviously changes coming in how Google are handling it and search results. AMP as a standard will continue to evolve and mature independently of how Google treats it in the search engines. The whole SEO industry seems to have misunderstood this and is misinterpreting and then saying that it's going to die and go away. It's not. It's an incredible library of things. It would be really interesting to see where it goes as they start to modularize the components. So Bento AMP is going to start to take shape later this year, where you can just load in individual components. I want a slider, I want an image gallery, I want a nav, and you can load the AMP-friendly version of that. Hopefully that'll play nicely with Gatsby, and we will have a performance powerhouse.
All right, that's great to hear. I know AMP was like a huge deal when it first came out. A lot of the great like news websites shifted over to it, and then I think that's where like people mainly thought that if you don't have a news site, you don't need it. But it's super interesting to see that it kind of will hopefully flourish and continue. All right, I have a question here on server control max age to optimize caching. I'm guessing that's for either of you there.
I've talked a lot. Do you want to grab that?
I didn't quite catch the question.
No worries. Best practices for using server control max age to optimize caching.
So I think like, I mean, I can kind of speak from like a Gatsby, you know, in the context of Gatsby sites. So there's like these kind of like HTML control headers that you put on the CDN. For Gatsby, a lot of the JavaScript resources that we're using are immutable. So like the HTML headers are sort of less of a less of an impact there, and that particular one I think in specific.
All right, it is 11:59. We're gonna get. Oh, sorry, Jono.
No, go. It's all right.
I was just gonna say we're gonna get kicked off here at the hour. There are a few questions that are super specific that we can definitely get to. We'll start a thread up on Twitter. Also, we can email any of your specific. There's a couple like small Gatsby things here that I think we can get back to personally. But Gatsby, want to thank everyone for showing up today. Sam, Jono, it was an awesome talk. Appreciate it from both of you. And hopefully we see some good success in the web development world with Core Vitals coming out in 2021.
It was a pleasure chatting with everyone. You know, I'm on Twitter. CalcSam is my handle. If you have questions, you know, send them over to me there.
John, are you on Twitter? Can we talk to you on
Twitter? Yeah, I'm all over Twitter all the time. Thanks to everyone who came. Thanks for some great questions. Thanks for the Gatsby team for hosting this. This was great fun.
Thank you guys. Have a good one. Enjoy the rest of your day.